Hi, I'm Hannah Weiss, the Director of Education at the Museum of Western Virginia, and this is your Moment of STEM. And this week, with Dorian, one of the many significant hurricanes to make landfall in the United States in recent years, battering the East Coast. Really awesome to talk about hurricanes. Because even though I know what a hurricane is, I still have kind of a lot of questions about them. Like, what makes a hurricane, or how do they form? Or even what can we do about them? So we can kind of just start there. What is a hurricane? A massive storm. A hurricane is one of three tropical storms. These big, massive storms that start in tropical regions. Depending upon where you are in the world, a hurricane, a tropical cyclone, or okay, so a hurricane is basically our word for a tropical cyclone, which is awesome. A tropical cyclone. Massive storms that start Atlantic anyway, over the Atlantic basin. They often start as kind of like disturbances, a tropical wave that builds, usually because of the warm water. See, what happens when the water is warm is that the air above it gets warm, and as we all know, warm air rises. So that warm air rises and new air rushes underneath. And that just keeps happening over and over again. And over time you have these massive columns of warm air. But as that wet warm air gets higher, it gets colder too. And so those water droplets in the air condense, forming clouds. And these can also grow into huge atmospheric instabilities that can also, due to some really weirdness with pressure differentials, start to develop rotation and even organize themselves. So as these storms get bigger, develop rotation and organize, they go from being tropical waves to tropical depressions to tropical storms to even hurricanes. Storms form over warm water, and they need a ton of conditions right in order for them to form. But now we have this question of what's the difference between a hurricane and a tropical storm or tropical depression? And the answer there has to do with, well, how organized it is, but also wind speed and atmospheric. At a certain point, a storm stops being a tropical depression and becomes a tropical storm, which is when we name them. And at some point, it then stops being a tropical storm and becomes a hurricane. Hurricanes are then categorized further based on their wind speed and their atmospheric pressure, using something called the Saffir-Simpson scale. So hurricanes are categorized from 1 to 5, with 5 being the biggest hurricane. A hurricane is considered significant if it's above a category 3, if its wind speeds are above about 111 miles per hour. So Dorian right now, still, as we record this, I think, is a significant hurricane. It's a category 3 again, which is crazy strong. Of course, it's not just the category of a hurricane that matters, because really damaging hurricanes can be below a category 3. See, another really dangerous part of a hurricane has to do with storm surge. That's water that's kind of pushed ashore, huge winds. And storm surge can actually be form. Another kind of big question out there for hurricanes is, how do we predict where they go? Which is something that's very tricky. Because hurricanes, if there weren't any of these called guiding or steering winds, would really stay still, or kind of start to drift towards the North or South Pole, depending upon where on the equator they were. But we do have these other winds. We have these guiding winds that kind of steer them in directions. And meteorologists use these winds to make predictions about where the storms are going to be. But there are other factors that can control what happens. For example, over really warm water, a hurricane can stall. So Florence last year was guilty of doing that. It actually partially hit this area because it stalled out over warm water for so long. Different land formations can make hurricanes stall too. One of the big fears with Florence was that it would get over this area and be stuck by the mountains. Cold water can also affect a hurricane. In cold water, a hurricane's much more likely to de-intensify, to drop from category 3 to category 2 or below. But it's also more likely to behave erratically and move really quickly. Hurricanes up north, like in the New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts area, are really, really dangerous because they move really, really fast and really unpredictably. And they usually then hit communities that are unprepared for them. So what do you do if a hurricane is coming your way? Well, pay attention to the news. If they tell you to evacuate, evacuate. Don't try to, be the hero and ride out the storm, because these storms are dangerous. If they tell you to shelter in place, well, try and stay where you are. But do make sure that you've taken precautions, right? Make sure that you have food and water stockpiled. Make sure that if you have something that needs electricity, like an oxygen machine, or have a loved one that requires kind of controlled temperatures, make sure that you have a generator, because these storms do knock out power a lot. And also make sure that you have any medications that you need stockpiled. And stay inside until you're told that it's safe to leave. These storms are kind of marked and known for their eyes, right? They have this huge eye in the center of the storm that they rotate around. But in that center of the storm, it's very calm. Just outside that eye, though, is the eye wall, and that is some of the most dangerous part of the storm, so you don't want to be outside during that. Of course, once it is safe to go outside, you still do need to be careful, because there could be downed power lines. You don't want to drive through any water because you never know how deep it is or what that water is hiding. And of course, during the storm itself, stay away from windows. Just as with any dangerous windstorm, in the fight of tree versus your window is going to lose every time. If you know more about hurricanes, Dorian, or any of the ways that you can stay safe during hurricanes, check out any of the links below. Otherwise, I'm Hannah Weiss from the Science Museum of Western Virginia. And one really cool thing I found out while doing this is that the Saffir-Simpson scale, which we use to measure hurricanes' kind of intensity, is really, really recent. In fact, it wasn't even used until Camille in 1969, I believe, when meteorologists made the decision to tell people not just that there was a hurricane coming, but for the first time how intense this storm was, as a way to try to save more lives.